Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 47 of an exciting series. What if Villain Deku became a teacher at U.A? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Bill on Fanfiction.net. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. Ainin gulped as she stood in front of the gates of U.A. Maybe if she had gone to this school, she would feel less intimidated by the large, overlooming gates. As it was, she nervously fiddled with the glove she wore to keep her quirk from accidentally being used. Thank goodness she hadn't come in costume like she was considering. The media would have had a field day running footage of her pacing outside of the gates or swarmed by fans. But everything seemed to be going so fast. Nisa had arranged and completed her interview over video call. All of which was very nerve-wracking, mind you, especially when he told her to answer the door because it was a courier with her contract. Ainin didn't even want to know how Nisa knew where she lived or if he hacked into her building's cameras. She was holding the official letter of confirmation of employment at UA and the details of how to go about getting her ID badge and registered in the employee system. And Ainin was supposed to go to the main building, meet with one of the other TAs to get herself all set up, and they would walk her through the process. Then she would be introduced to the other staff members of the hero course, plus the heads of the departments. Fun. Now all she had to do was walk through the gates and get everything settled. If only her feet would actually listen to her and let her go inside. Ainin groaned, burying her face in her hands. Why was adulting so strong? She'd had less nerves cleaning up after hero fights. "Excuse me," someone behind her suddenly said, and Ainin squeaked, whirling around, and held her hands up towards the source of the voice. Which, of course, with her luck today, just had to be the country's hot-button topic. One Midoriya Izuku. And here she was pointing her hands at him, like she was planning to use her quirk. Cammy, could she be fired the same day she started? Never mind, Nizu would find a way to get her fired for this even if he couldn't. Asterisk, get yourself together, Ainin, and put your hands down already. Asterisk, Ainin scolded herself, quickly lowering her arms and putting them behind her back, half stringing together an apology in her head. "I am so sorry, I didn't mean to." Ainin sputtered, her hands waving unconsciously as she mentally fumbled until she spotted them and put them back behind her with her face bright red with shame. Midoriya merely smiled empathetically and gave her a pat on the arm. "It's all right. These gates are total overkill, and I know better than to sneak up on someone like that," Midoriya kindly told her, helping take a massive load off her shoulders now that she wasn't afraid that Midoriya would get her fired over this misunderstanding. "Oh, thank the Kami," Ainin muttered, hand over her heart, and thanking the spirits for Midoriya being so understanding. Maybe she was right to leave 5 yen at the shrine she passed. "You must be Kuro-san, yes?" Midoriya asked, bringing her out of her thoughts. "Why, yeah, that's me," Ainin confirmed, wondering how he knew her name. "Nisa-san asked me to help you out today, as the only other TA of the hero course and future teachers in the same course. We'll be working together often, so Nisa-san thought it would be best if I was the one to show you around," Midoriya explained to her. "Oh, great," Ainin squeaked, her brain stalling for a second. Then she processed what Midoriya said and recalled he wasn't supposed to meet up with her. She was supposed to go meet him, and she quickly bowed. "I'm so sorry for taking so long and making you have to come and get me and dash." Ainin quickly began to apologize but stopped when she felt Midoriya's hands on her shoulders. Hey, there's no need for that," Midoriya assured her as he pushed her to stand up again. "You're still early, Kuro-san. I was just eager to meet with you," Midoriya told her, waving his hands placatingly. "Oh, thanks. I didn't know you were a fan of my work," Ainin replied, wondering if she felt unsettled by the boy paying so much attention to her work. Midoriya rubbed the back of his head. "Well, yeah, but one of my friends is a major fan of your work, and I've kept an eye on news of your work for her," Midoriya said back. That was surprisingly sweet of him. "But that's enough about me. You must be nervous enough about getting everything finalized," Midoriya told her, pointing a thumb back inside the gates. "So, if you'll just follow me to the main building," Midoriya requested. "Right, of course," Ainin told him, quickly following him over the threshold, the same threshold that she hadn't been able to cross moments earlier. She took a moment to give it the stink eye for all the trouble it gave her earlier. Kuroz-san, Midoriya called, making her jolt again. I'm coming, Ainin replied, quickly getting back to following Midoriya. Thankfully, the distance between the gate and the main building was short, though she had to wonder what was with this school and having such big entrances. Midoriya's comment about overkill with the gates was pretty accurate. I'll give you a tour later once you're in the system, but first I'll take you over to the security office. That's where we'll get your details sorted. Midoriya explained to her after opening the door for her. Ainin nodded her head and followed Midoriya through the halls to a room. Showing her the temporary badge Nizu sent her before the woman behind the desk let her and Midoriya through into the room. She stared surprised at the other 5 people in the room and the screens they were monitoring. Midoriya's chuckle brought her attention back to him. Yeah, I was pretty surprised when I saw there was security here, but it's not like the board could hire a bunch of heroes to do this. Well, they could, but it would cost way more than a professional security company. Midoriya said as they both went over to a small corner table and then motioned for her to sit with him. Oh yeah, that makes sense, Ainin admitted. Heroes did patrol, but they weren't exactly trained for guarding an area proper, like a security company guards would be. Maybe a support-focused hero would be able to operate the technical side, but that would be more costly than getting professional guards. I just can't believe I've never seen or heard of them before now, Ainin told the boy. Well, they aren't supposed to respond to things aside from emergencies, like if there was a villain attack or a bomb threat. Midoriya explained, opening a laptop and logging onto something. Most of the staff are heroes, so they can manage any small student skirmishes and the media. So, the guards focus on patrolling the grounds, preventing students from accessing areas they're not meant to be, and keeping an eye on the cybersecurity. Midoriya further elaborated for her. Ainin nodded. Again, the boy made a lot of sense. This was supposed to be a high-end hero school, so it wasn't likely for them to be called in for a stabbing in the cafeteria all that often. So, this is the employee portal. I've already brought up the new employee form for you. Just fill it out to the best of your abilities, okay? Midoriya informed her, pushing the laptop over to her. Yeah, thank you, Midoriya, Ainin told him. The boy nodded back to her and then covered his eyes with his hands. Ainin brought a hand up to cover her mouth. That was something only a kid would do, and it really helped her get over any lingering concerns over working with the boy. He was way sweeter than the media made him out to be. Then again, they were always pretty antagonistic towards him. Shaking her head, Ainin began to fill out the boxes with the general details: legal name, official alias, age, birth date, and other small things. All in all, it took 5 minutes maybe. Then when she was done, she passed the laptop back over to Midoriya. Okay, all done, Ainin told him. Good, it'll take time to print the ID card. Until then, I'll show you around, Midoriya informed her as he stood back up. The inside of the main building is very complex and winding, as unlikely as it would be for there to be a direct attack to the students in the main building. Nizu would not risk the safety of the students. Midoriya informed her. Ainin rubbed her arm, not too winding right. Ainin asked, knowing her sense of direction was horrid on a good day. Without a GPS, it will be confusing, but you'll get the hang of it in a month or 2. Midoriya assured her. As a rescue instructor, though, you will spend half of the day out of the main building. The Hero Course's rescue training normally takes place in one of the training grounds or the USJ. I'll show you where the vehicle depot is later, Midoriya explained to Ainin. But I'll start by showing you where the teacher's lounge is. Oh, wait. Midoriya was telling her only to grab her arm and keep her from walking forward. What is dash? Ainin tried to ask, only of the ground beneath them to shake. Well, rumble, really? What was that? Ainin asked, concerned. The support course first years, Midoriya answered dully. You'll get used to it eventually. Don't worry about any of the rumbles you'll feel throughout today aren't concerning, unless someone hits the alarm. Midoriya explained to her. Are you sure that's okay? Ainin questioned, feeling a bit uneasy. Midoriya gave her a sympathetic look. I understand why you're worrying, but the first-year curriculum involves understanding exactly how bad certain reactions can be instead of letting the students come across them naturally when it could hurt someone unprepared or unexpecting it. Midoriya told her. All with careful observation from their teachers and safety measures if one of those planned mistakes goes wrong. And one of the security guards is also tasked with watching each of the support labs in case something goes wrong as well. Midoriya further elaborated for her. Ainin admittedly felt more at ease once Midoriya told her about the safety measures. So, does that rumbling happen often? Ainin asked. No. Today is about chemicals that would explode when exposed by accident to common resources or catch a stray spark from machinery/tools they use. Midoriya told her, nervously rubbing his back. That's why I knew when to stop. The exact schedule is very strict since all 3 of the first years have to go through it in one day. Midoriya detailed for her. I see, Ainin said, nodding her head. Now, this is the first year's halls. It's subtle, but the color of the molding on the ceiling shows you where the Gen Ed, Hero, and Business classrooms are. Midoriya pointed out, pointing to the molding above them. Black, blue, and green stripes on the molding. Ah, that's clever, Ainin replied, slightly confused. Black is for the Hero course, blue for Gen Ed, and green for Business. And Niza had it moved to the molding on the ceiling because most people wouldn't look up that high randomly or would notice it out of context. Midoriya told her. Ainin wasn't sure if that was smart or paranoid. But what about the support course? Ainin questioned. All of the support course's classes are in the basement and sub-basement levels for our and their protection. The only above-ground labs are at separate buildings, again for our and their protection if something goes wrong. Midoriya answered casually. Now here is the lounge. Midoriya told her, opening up one of the doors and motioning her to come inside. Ainin sat on her bed with a sigh, ripping off her gloves, and quickly drank down a Purian can. Today had been anxiety-inducing. You had been everything she had been expecting, and completely overwhelming with absolutely everything. Like the support course being more advanced than the one at her school, but also sounded more dangerous than her own, even if they were carefully supervised. And actually meeting the other teachers she would be working with was even more intimidating. She had heard of Karen-san from her coworkers, and spirits, was she scarier than they told her. Thank goodness she would be retiring after this year. She didn't think her heart could take working with someone that intimidating. Not that she wasn't a good teacher, Karen-san just freaked her out. At least most of the staff was as friendly as Midoriya was, and she looked forward to working with and shadowing Isamu-san. And she had about 3 months to adjust herself to working with the staff of UA this coming September, which wouldn't be much time to prepare herself to work as a full teacher at UA, but she was determined. Midoriya was managing it, and he was half her age. She would come up with something. Maybe she should ask the boy for some advice for how to be more confident in the classroom. While Nijire had appreciated Deku-Sensei consideration to give them a full week to think on whether or not to take inheritance. It was not necessary. Sure, all of the all-for-one stuff was panic-inducing to think about it. But there was only one question that Nijire had about taking the quirk. Only one question that she felt was the most important to ask. So, she waited until the next day and made an excuse about leaving her phone back in the classroom and told her friends to go on and head to Miyake's place without her, and that she would be there before they knew it. She had left her phone in the classroom to make it more believable, but it was a lie all the same. But she needed to talk alone with Deku-Sensei, though. He seemed to be expecting her as he was waiting for her in two. Deku-Sensei, Nijire said, pausing to wet her lips, and took a deep breath before she continued to say, I need to ask you something about inheritance. She had to know. And you know why I think you would be a good candidate, Hato-san? There was no other way for her to look at what he said. He had to know the truth about her quirk beyond the basic energy quirk they put into her file. She wasn't even surprised he figured it out. How else was she supposed to take his words? She needed to know she wasn't reading too much into his words. Nijire didn't want to get her hopes up, but if there was a chance she was right, you want to know if taking inheritance would kill you? Deku-Sensei said like it wasn't a guess or question. It didn't surprise her. If Deku-Sensei was smart enough to figure out her quirk, it wouldn't be all too strong to reach the logical conclusion of how she'd feel about it. Nijire nodded, her clenched hands held over her racing heart. By my current calculations, if you were to take inheritance, it would kill you in roughly 200 years, at which point your quirk wouldn't be able to keep up with the entropy made and finally start to rapidly age you until you pass from mental degeneration. Deku-Sensei somberly answered her. Nijire's heart skipped, and a lump formed in her throat. Why, you're sure? Nijire whispered. Deku-Sensei nodded, pulling out a file from his bag. This is the calculations I've made to figure out how long it would take. You can go over them yourself if you want. Deku-Sensei offered it to her. Nijire stared at the papers for a second, then leapt at Deku-Sensei and crushed him to her chest with a hug. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Nijire sobbed repeatedly into his shoulder. Deku-Sensei's arms wrapped around her, and he gently stroked her hair, letting her cry it all out. Her friends probably wouldn't understand why she felt so utterly and painfully relieved to hear that inheritance would kill her. Most people wouldn't, but they didn't have to stand on the edge of immortality and be forced to watch how it changed people. Nijire had. Her Obeiken used to be a spirited girl. She'd seen pictures and videos from when Obeiken was her age, and they could have been twins. Now, though Obeiken wasn't a cold woman per se, but she was so detached with everything. She still remembered how she used to look through her and tell her mother, "How nice, dear," so flatly. If that instead of an HN, it was to protect herself. She understood that when she got older and saw her mom had over 20 siblings that had lived and died before her mother was even born. After so much loss, there was only so much a person could take before they just shut down. It was why she tried not to let the words Obeiken said when her mom passed when she was 10 sting. Her quirk had already discovered and covered up by that point. You'll get used to it. But it was so much harder to do when she said the same thing when her best friend since diapers Kimmy passed in a car accident the next year, and her Obeiken said the same DMN thing again. You get used to it. She couldn't even be allowed to mourn the dog. She had her whole life without her flatly telling her. You'll get used to it. Nijire didn't want to get used to it. She did not want to one day look at her own crying grandchild one day and feel so goddamn numb that she'd ever tell them those cursed words. She hated the idea that one day she would be so disconnected from her own emotions that she would stop feeling it when her friends died. And more than everything she hated about being immortal, Nijire feared the day she would bury one of her children that she wouldn't cry about it because she just couldn't even care anymore. Living for 200 more years would still be a lot of time to mourn and grieve for her friends, and probably even their children too. But 200 years sounded so much better than the possible millions of years she was currently looking at now. Yes, death and the thought of dying one day was frightening to her. She was still just as human as any other person. But between her two options, she would gladly welcome death's cold embrace over the endless madness that would come with immortality. And now she had the perfect excuse to die early. She never felt so alive as she read Deku-Sensei's calculations. They were off in a few places since Deku-Sensei hadn't been able to directly observe her quirk. Nijire would probably live closer to 500 years, which was still better than sitting on eternity. Have you thought about Deku-Sensei's offer? Miyake asked her when the two of them were alone after training on the third day of the waiting PRD. Nijire stared up at him like a deer in headlights. Nerves getting the better of her, and she played with her hair nervously before she finally answered. I'm going to take it. No one can change my mind on that. Miyake stared at her then nodded, carefully pulling her in for a hug. And Nijire was relieved when he didn't press her for why she wanted to take inheritance. Though, in the future, one would have to explain her immortality to her friends when it became obvious she wasn't aging like they did. She'd tell him first. Miyake would take the news the best. Later on, the Sunday of that week, they all went to talk about it at Miyake's apartment. She half listened as they talked about this point and that, of what kind of quirks they might get along with inheritance, of the scary idea that all for one would forever be watching them. What would they even be able to do if they were forced to fight with all for one? Who could handle having 8 strangers in their head? All very important things, of course, but Nijire had already made up her mind. She would be taking inheritance. As much as it hurt to think about how much her reasons would hurt her friends, she would never be talked out of not taking it. Deku-Sensei had offered inheritance as a form of indirect suicide for her after all, and they would all rage if they knew that. Upset with her choosing to end her life like this, not when she had so much to live for. But there were some things that people just couldn't understand if they weren't in your shoes. And she didn't want to go through continuous pain as she watches everyone she loves repeatedly die in F cycles until she finally goes numb to it all. She'd still live a long, fulfilling life in 500 years, find love once or twice, raise some dim-in good kids, maybe have some grandbabies. Becoming a living legend of a hero would only take 100 years, if that, and retire somewhere fun after globetrotting for a bit. She didn't need to know what the surface of any of the distant planets was like, or what the solar system next to theirs was like either. Hell, she could be struck down by a bolt of lightning right now, and Nijire wouldn't have any regrets if she passed away the same day. Eventually, on the last day before she could tell Deku-Sensei that she wanted inheritance, she got approached by Jiki to talk alone. "Why you haven't really talked much about, you know what?" Jiki pointed out, once they were somewhere over at one of the furthest lunch tables. Nijire fiddled with her sleeves and bounced one of her legs to keep from building up too much energy. "You want to take it, don't you?" Jiki guessed, fidgeting with sleeve himself and barely able to meet her eyes for more than a few seconds. Nijire turned away from him, biting her lip. Shaky hands took hers. Will it make you happy?" Jiki asked her. Nijire turned back to him and nodded her head. "Yeah, will?" Nijire confessed. "Then I'm sure you've put a lot of thought into this." Jiki told her after taking a deep breath himself, a jumbled-up smile on his face. Tears built up in the corners of her eyes. Nijire couldn't help herself from saying, If I have you there with me, then I think I can be brave enough to take it too." Jiki muttered his hand, gripping her as best they could since his hands were still shaking. Nijire gasped, "Wah, you're going to take it too?" Nijire whisper shouted at Jiki, completely shocked. But you, why would you dash?" Nijire sputtered, looking at him completely lost. Jiki wanted to take inheritance. Why? He didn't need the quirk to be strong when he was already plenty strong on his own, and Jiki would hate to have like 8 strangers in his head. He couldn't handle talking with strangers in the real world. Having that many strangers in his head would be torture. Jiki gulped, tightening his hands on hers. "I know this sounds so out of place from someone like me." Jiki admitted, unable to meet her eyes. "I know you think I'm strong, even if I don't see it myself, and it's really strong for me to understand what everyone else sees in me." Jiki told her, trying to build himself up and not doing it well. "And the idea of taking it terrifies me to my core," Jiki confessed, tears pricking his eyes, much like the ones in her eyes. But the thought of you having to fight that monster all on your own is just, I can't let you do that." Jiki said, pausing to gulp. "So, if that means that I have to take it with you, then so be it." Jiki stated a bit more firmly, "You're my friend Nijire-chan, and I won't let you do this alone. And if comes down to it, then I'll be right there beside you when it's time to fight." Jiki promised, a small flash of his growing backbone helping to make his point. Tears started rolling down her cheeks as Jiki's words hit her like a sucker punch as she stared at Jiki in total disbelief. "Jiki," Nijire said, her voice choked before she wrapped Jiki up in a hug. "Thank you," she whispered to him, silently crying with her head over his shoulder. Jiki's face buried in her own, his body trembling as he hugged her back. God, this was she never would have ever expected Jiki would do this, that he would go so far for her. But perhaps she had allowed herself to be blinded a little to her friend's own capabilities. And now here she was. She never wanted life to ever stop surprising her with how her friends were some of the absolutely best people on the planet. Mirio found himself rather fidgety when the week of consideration had finally passed, and it was time to tell everyone what Sunny and Nijire had decided. Both of them had sat them down outside before school started and told them they had made their decision about whether they'd take inheritance. So, as he sat in class, he couldn't help feeling pretty anxious, and it was a bit strong for him to focus on any of his classes that day. He'd need to ask Miyake for his notes later. Miyake was probably the only one of them that would have the presence of mind to pay attention enough to take notes. Not that he could blame anyone with everything that was going on. Evil overlords from the very dawning, quirks that could be shared with just about anyone, and being caught up in it because his friends were the only people that could handle said shared quirk. Yeah, the fact he was able to pay attention all of the other days was really a testament from his training with Sir to multitask when internally dying inside. A skill he didn't think he'd need to rely on so soon in life. But if he couldn't roll with the punches, then he wouldn't be a very good hero and would have failed Sir's training way more often. Mirio sighed and then did his best to refocus his attention on the pop quiz present Mike sprung on them. Not that he was blaming the man, but Mike Sensei had the worst timing for pop quizzes sometimes. Thankfully, English was his last class today, and he just needed to finish up this quiz. Then he and the others can go to Nisa's office to get this whole thing over with. Honestly, he couldn't imagine how Sunny and Nijire were handling this since they were the ones offered inheritance. Having to choose whether or not to accept a power, which might be the only way to defeat an ancient evil. Yeah, he really didn't envy either of them. Sure, the idea of gaining a lot more power would be pretty cool, like if he could take other people with him through walls and stuff would be so awesome. But having some other separate power fostered off to him, without any other reason than just because, Mirio would have said no in a heartbeat. Like, no disrespect, he used to wish he had some kind of flight quirk when he was younger, because he wanted to be up high with the planes above, mainly because they went to the coolest of places. But after working so dang HRD on himself and his quirk, with the help of so many people out there to become the best possible hero he could be, it just wouldn't feel right to. Like, it would feel like he was cheating himself. Because sure, having the strength of All Might or something might make his goal of saving 1,000,000 people easier, and yet how he saved them really shouldn't matter that much since saving people was supposed to be the important part. However, he'd still feel disappointed in himself in the end for relying on a crutch to get him to that goal, especially after all of work people had done to help him. Like Sir clearly believed in his potential a lot to have taken so much interest in training him, and to go so far as to let him train with him outside of his internships. So no, it just wouldn't be right to let all of the effort and time Sir spent training him to just let all of Sir's efforts go down the drain. Okay, little listeners, pencils down, Mike Sensei called, and Mirio hurriedly looked at his paper to make sure he at least filled the circles or picked something for each question. As he handed in the test while leaving, Mirio was at least 25% sure he bombed at maybe 14% sure. But that was hardly important right now. Come on, STRPR, got a meeting we need to get to, Oswald said once he came out of his classroom, the Pinkette standing with the others on the other side of his class's door for him. Mirio beamed at them and followed all of them to the principal's office, letting Sunny hide between himself and Miyake as they walked up. Mirio also made sure to look over at Nijire once in a while. She had been quieter the last week, most likely thinking very HRD on whether or not to take inheritance. They reached the office rather quickly, and much like last time, Deku-Sensei was waiting outside for them. Hello, I hope you've all given this a lot of thought, Deku-Sensei told them, opening the door for them. Nisa's office was set up the same way it was before, with couches for all of them, and had the same number of people inside it. Haruki-sensei, Nizu, Recovery Girl, and Yagi-sen waiting for them. They all settled down, Miyake in the middle of the couch, Sunny in between him and Miyake, Nijire on the other side of Miyake with Heya on her other side, and Oswald choosing to stand and lean against the arm of the couch. Nisa locking the office down once again. So, I presume that you all have made your choices, Hato-chan, Amajiki-kun. Nisa guessed, his voice soft. Nijire and Sunny both nodded their heads. What have you two decided? Deku-sensei asked. We're both taking inheritance. Nijire told him, Jiki and I both have our reasons, but if it's possible for us both to take inheritance, then we will. We would both feel better about this if we both did this together. Nijire explained to them. Mirio's eyes went wide, and he looked at Sunny shocked. He wanted to take inheritance. Really? I see. Well, that was unexpected, but we shall be able to adjust plans to fit there being two holders of inheritance. Nisa calmly told them. So, do they have to drink BLD smoothies now? Mirio asked, worried about what was supposed to happen now. No, first we have to make sure both Hato and Amajiki are physically capable of handling the quirk being passed on to them. We'll have both of you run through some tests to determine your current state of health and work up some training plans for each of you. Deku-sensei answered, pulling out some notebooks. We can do those tests during the coming Sunday. We can have a clean baseline for the test then, and introduce you to the others also aware of inheritance, and in on the mission to kill all for one. Nizu confirmed with a nod of his head. Who else knows about this? Heya questioned a bit defensively. Yagi-san's mentor, who was the seventh holders, the one before Yagi-san, partner in fighting all for one, a detective on the police force with a truth quirk, and one other hero, but due to current circumstances we won't be able to contact them right now. Deku-sensei informed them, an uncharacteristic scowl on his face when he mentioned the unnamed hero. Okay then, do you need anything else from us, Deku-Sensei? Mirio asked, glancing at the others to see if they also noticed the weird way Deku-Sensei spoke about the hero. No, we don't have anything pressing to speak with you about. Not anything that can't wait until Sunday. But if any of you still have questions, then you can still ask me, Niza-san, and Haruki-san about this at any time. Deku-Sensei assured them. Okay, great. We're going to PSS off and go get pizza at Miyake's place now. Oswald told them, standing up, his hair twitching a lot. Of course, allow me to lift the lockdown. Niza chirped back, and once the metal plates were up, the 6 of them left. It was surprising how unchanged things were after Sunny and Nijire chose to take inheritance. But then again, maybe he was just being a bit paranoid because of that old saying of the calm before the storm. Not everything had to turn into something awful right away. Even if his friends were technically getting prepared to take on an ancient evil from the dawning. It was as Deku-Sensei kept repeating to them. Only a last resort if their current plans were to fall through and would not be their responsibility unless that happened. So, Sunday came before they knew it, and the tests Deku-Sensei and Recovery Girl were pretty basic, including dietary tests since they would need to adjust their current diets to account for their new quirk's needs as well. Plans were made an hour later and given to them, and they all decided to go over them together at one of the lunch tables outside as they ate together. Nijire's plan wasn't as intense as Sunny's so far, but as Mirio started looking through it, he realized that most of Sunny's was his new diet. Oh, geez, Sunny, that's a lot of things I don't think I'll be able to pronounce. Thank goodness Nizu and Deku-Sensei will be providing this for you, right, Sunny? Mirio tried to joke. Sunny nodded, looking a bit faint, thinking about having to buy all that himself. Wouldn't even know where to buy it, Sunny muttered. Nijire-chan, is there something wrong? Heya asked, and Mirio looked up from Sunny's plan to look at Nijire, and saw she was frowning as she looked at her plan. Mirio, could you hand me Jiki's plan, please? Nijire requested instead. Sure. Mirio agreed, offering the plan over to her. Nijire quickly flipped through the papers back to the physical training, and her eyes flying over the pages. Then her hands clenched. Miyake, look at both of these, Nijire said, shoving both of them over to their giant friend. Miyake tilted his head curiously, and then went ahead to read both textbooks they were given, and was halfway through reading the second one when he paused. You see it too, right? Nijire hissed conspiratorially, her eyes flicking over to Mirio once or twice. Miyake hissed back in a rare show of ire. Whoa, mind letting the rest of the class in on what's got you both in a tizzy? Oswald questioned, looking between the two of them. Nijire took out her phone and rapidly typed something up and then showed her screen to Oswald, who frowned at her before looking at her phone. Then his eyes went wide. What the F? Oswald hissed, moving to stare at him while Nijire switched over to show Heya and Sunny next. Sunny going pale and Heya gasping. What? What is it? Mirio asked, feeling his heart sink as he felt himself being left out of the loop. Heya gulped while Nijire angrily typed some more on her phone. Mirio, did Sir ever tell you why he had you on the current plan you're following? Heya hesitantly asked him, nervously fidgeting and her words a bit stilted. Yeah, he said I need to build up my muscles to put some real strength behind my punches, you know. Mirio answered, feeling even more weirded out when she asked that of all things. Nijire scowled then. Did he follow some kind of guide? Or show you a website where he got it? Heya asked, a bit more desperate now. No. Guys, can you just tell me what's going on? I'm sort of freaking out now. Mirio asked, really feeling a bit scared now. Nijire then showed him her phone with a bunch of calculations on it. Numbers from Sunny's training plan, ones that were hers he thought, and the numbers from his training plan. All of which seemed to be simple adjustments from each other's, with numbers being the smallest, Nijire's tripled of his, and Sunny's being like 6 times more than his own. Something like a pebble sat in his stomach, and Mirio forced himself to chuckle. Oh, our training plans can be multiple like that. That's pretty cool, Mirio said, trying to pass it off. What a strange coincidence, Mirio added a moment later, chuckling even more as he rubbed the back of his neck when the others just looked at him, and it was making him feel uneasy, especially when they looked at him pitifully or irritated. Come on, guys, why are you all getting so worked up? Mirio asked them, unease slowly worming around in his CHSD. Mirio, Why does Sir have you on a workout plan that lines up almost one-to-one with the specialized plans Deku-Sensei made for us to take inheritance? Nijire questioned him back. Well, there's probably only so many ways to build up muscles. Mirio answered, his unease not going away. I swear I am going to shank that mother dash, Oswald hissed as his hair moved like snakes, with his hands crushing the paper cup in his hands. What's wrong? Deku-Sensei suddenly asked, causing everyone to turn to him. Did you know? Nijire demanded, glaring at him. Deku-Sensei glanced at the plans, and then each of them, before he sighed. No, not at first. Sir was very careful to keep his plans hidden from Nizu and later myself. Deku-Sensei answered. I'll repeat myself. I'm going to shank that mot-half. Oswald growled, Miyake hissing in agreement, tail flicking with irritation. Whoa. Mirio said, waving his hands as he stood up. Feeling even more lost, what are you guys all freaking out about? Mirio questioned, that dread making the pebble grow where it sat in his stomach. Deku-Sensei shot him a sad look, and his shoulders slumped. I was hoping to talk with you about this in private later, Deku-Sensei admitted, then took a deep breath before fully facing him. Mirio, Deku-Sensei said, Sir was the hero I mentioned being in the fold about inheritance. Deku-Sensei told him. Oh, that would make sense, he guessed. He probably saw all for one in a vision or something. But then why did Deku-Sensei say that he wasn't available to meet with them? Maybe Sir was working on a big operation. Sir hadn't been texting him or answering his texts, but Sir usually told him before those big missions came up. Maybe it was a part of the operation to kill all for one. That would totally explain why Sir wasn't answering him. Mirio's good mood was crushed by Deku-Sensei's next words. And the reason he wasn't here for the meetings we've had, Mirio, is because during the last meeting before we brought you all in, we learned that Sir was grooming you to take inheritance for almost 2 years now. Deku-Sensei told him. Mirio's heart dropped, sputtered denials quickly coming from his lips as he staggered back from them. Miyake was quick to wrap him in a hug and sat them both down on the ground. He didn't, he wouldn't, Mirio said, trying to form some sort of rebuttal, but he was too emotional for his mouth to work right now. Deku-Sensei put his hands on his shoulders, cutting him off. I know that he never said anything or did anything that most people associate with typical grooming, but he did carefully manipulate your training so that you could take inheritance, and strongly tried to insist that Yagi-san give you the quirk. Deku-Sensei carefully told him. But my quirk, you said dash, Mirio tried to protest, because there was no way that Sir would make him take a quirk that would have killed him to take. Sir started training you before Nizusan asked for my help as a quirk science expert. The others had no understanding beyond what they teach you in kindergarten about quirks before then. Deku-Sensei explained, looking more dejected. But even after I told him that you would never be able to take inheritance without it killing you, he insisted that you should have taken the quirk despite our protests and refused to listen to me. Deku-Sensei said, the words like a stab to his chest, tears building in his eyes as he felt choked. Sir insisted. Did he only reach out and train him because he wanted Mirio to take inheritance? Did Sir really think that he couldn't be a hero on his own? That Mirio needed a crutch like inheritance to be won? I am so sorry you had to find out like this, Mirio, Deku-Sensei said, his voice sounding muffled, despite the fact he could still feel the boy's hands on his shoulders. Mirio couldn't stop himself from crying and buried his face in the closet thing that he could grab, which turned out to be Deku-Sensei. The boy didn't fight him and just wrapped his arms around Mirio in a firm hug. You are more than enough, Mirio. You are always enough and will be one of the greatest heroes out there. Deku-Sensei whispered in his ear, his arms holding him tighter as his sobbing became even louder. Izuku couldn't help feeling like he'd been put through the ringer this week. A constant awash of rage and hate, deep-rooted sorrow, disappointment in himself for being so blind, and then periods of numbness that left him feeling somewhat hollow. So being confronted by the group of 6 about Togata being groomed by Sasaki hadn't helped him with those feelings. He couldn't help feeling so slimy afterwards, once he finished doing his best to comfort Togata, letting his friends take him back home to further comfort the boy. Izuku hadn't meant to keep Sasaki's actions a secret for so long, but there hadn't been a moment where he could have pulled Togata aside to explain everything to him in private. He couldn't exactly tell Togata about the grooming before they knew about inheritance, since it would have been impossible to point out how Togata had been groomed, and after they were told they needed to have their minds as clear as possible to allow themselves to give as sound advice as they could to each other. But once they were told there just had to be a series of turf wars in a bunch of the districts which he had to help clean up, and it wouldn't feel right dumping the responsibility of telling Togata on either Ria or Mito when they were also so busy. And everyone unanimously agreed that he would have been the best person to tell Togata. Nizu admittedly wasn't the right person to explain such a thing to the boy. Gran Torino, Yagi, and Sakachi were strangers, and after learning he was groomed being alone with an adult teacher, there would probably be too much for him. So, while it wasn't intentional, telling the boy had been put off before his friends figured it out. Part of him was so proud of his students for being smart enough to realize the similarity and demanding answers from him. They might have jumped to the worst conclusion first, but that was probably for the best. The pit in his CHSD felt like it widened from thinking that. But as much as it hurt to say or think, they would need to be as paranoid as a two-toes in order to survive with all for one's eyes on them, especially if their plans fell apart somehow, which they easily could have if Iguchi-san hadn't come to him after learning about Tenko's villain identity. That had been the biggest bullet Izuku had dodged by a large margin. Iguchi-san suddenly cutting contact would have left Tenko spiraling in a very bad way. Iguchi-san was one of Shigaraki's very few real friends, and might be able to convince Tenko into a secret sleepover one of these days, which they could use to save Tenko once and for all. Of course, Iguchi-san's concerns were valid ones. Tenko had built himself quite the reputation under all for one's purview, and it was only a matter of time before Iguchi-san discovered his villain status after he joined the herd. So, with these things in mind, Izuku felt he had a rather bad week and couldn't be blamed for wanting to whine about his life with someone. Thankfully, he had someone that could do just that without putting himself in danger or cause a riot or a string of murders. Izuku made his way back to Nizu's office. Nizu was already there and waiting for him, a pack of ramen on the coffee table. Izuku sighed and let his shoulders slump as he walked over to the couch, laying face down on it. He heard the shuffle of claws, then the sound of the room becoming a dead zone followed by Nizu's concerned chirp. Izuku grumbled irately. The sound muffled by the couch cushion his face was still pressed against. Nizu chirped back and gave him a gentle lick on the hand that was limply hanging off the couch. Then Nizu climbed onto the couch and settled across his shoulders, softly nuzzling his neck and chirping and chuffing in equal measure. The pressure of Nizu's body there helped Izuku's mind settle somewhat, and it was so nice of Nizu to try and comfort him as best he could. Izuku made a MFPT sound to warn Nizu of his intention to move, because as tempting as it was to keep his face buried in the couch forever, he still needed to breathe, like most living people did. Nizu stood and leapt onto the arm, allowing Izuku to roll over onto his side. Then Nizu jumped back onto him and walked along his side until he jumped down, then buried himself in Izuku's arms with another concerned chirp. Izuku let Nizu stay where he was. Togata knows about Sasaki now, and his friends do too. Izuku told Nizu. Despite knowing Nizu would already know, Nizu was always on the cameras. Another concerned chirp from Nizu. Yeah, he didn't take it well. Inui-san said he feared Togata would have continuing self-worth issues from everything that happened with his class, and I think he used the fact Sasaki was so invested in him as a way to rebuild it. Izuku commented, Nizu chirping sadly, causing Izuku to scratch behind his ears. It must have been awful to learn that Sasaki only wanted him for inheritance. It was no wonder why therapists always warn people in self-help books about seeking help for someone else's sake, and to do it because you wanted to get better on your own. When all of your progress was dependent on someone like that, all it would take is a few wrong words to destroy it all. He'd seen it more than once with a few of the people getting clean at his farm. Stories of trying so strong to get clean, only for their lovers/partners/family to betray them and send them in a drag/alcoholic-fueled bender. Or worse, diving head-first into drags or liquor in order to join said loved ones on the other side in death. Togata thankfully had so many people to lean on to help him with the fallout, but he really would need to talk with someone professional about this. They all would before any threats of violence were made into warnings instead. Even if Sasaki absolutely deserved to be shanked by a group of teenage hero students for pulling that kind of CRP. And therein lay Izuku's newest hot-button problem. They would need a therapist that was trustworthy but wouldn't attract suspicion, which there would be a lot of if they switched from seeing Inui-san to one of the high-level pros the heroes used. Inui-san would also have a lot of questions, because even if they could convince him that they wanted a new therapist, Inui-san would want to know why they didn't want to see one of the other counselors they staffed. We'll need to bring more people into the mission and about inheritance, Izuku said, catching Nizu off guard. It seemed, judging by Nizu's confused chirp. Too many people will notice if they start seeing someone like Mikuko-san, so we'll need to read Inui-san about this. Hato-chan and Amajiki-kun will also need someone to talk to about the vestiges in their heads, and the others will need someone to rant to, Izuku detailed for him. Not to mention Togata's grooming. Izuku added. Nizu's ears lowered, but he chirped, agreeing with him. And with the accidents that could happen once they start learning to use the past holder's quirks, they can't rely on anti-quirk cuffs or drag, since that could kill them after they take inheritance. So we'll need a non-drag option to help there, Izuku pointed out. Nizu's ears perked up. Aizawa, Nizu said, and Izuku nodded. Yeah, I've checked the data on Aizawa-san's quirk. Thank you for that, by the way, but his quirk in small doses is what we'll need to help them. Not to mention that he'll be one of the few people that can help us kill all for one. Izuku confirmed with a slight nod of his head. He will also have a personal investment in this. He and Shirakumo were very close before All for One took him. Nizu replied. Yes, he won't be happy to hear about how we've kept this from him, Izuku commented, wincing slightly. Nizu chirped sadly, his ears lowering again. Izuku gently stroked Nizu's fur to comfort him. I'm sure he will forgive you. Aizawa-san is a very understanding person. He'll be mad, of course, but he'll understand with time that you were worried about Hato-chan and Amajiki-kun being discovered too soon. Izuku calmly told Nizu. And if he really wants to kick up a stink about us not telling him about Shirakumo, then I'll just tell him the truth, that we couldn't trust he wouldn't go after All for One right away. Izuku reassured him. Nizu chirped his thanks back. So, we'll need to tell the others we're bringing in Aizawa-san and Inui-san, and then keep Aizawa-san from gutting Sasaki, Izuku muttered. Nizu chuffed at the thought, and Izuku smiled too. The image of Sasaki getting his, but handed to him by a raging Aizawa-san would be absolutely golden, and he would even make sure it was filmed if such a fight did happen, so that everyone could enjoy it whenever they wanted. He was sure Hato-chan would pay hand over fist for the film, and probably publish it on the internet. And normally he wouldn't want to encourage such behavior in his students, but Sasaki had burned his bridges, and Izuku was ready to meet the man at his level if Sasaki chose to force him to go scorched earth. Feeling better, now Izuku sat up, and Nizu shifted to lay half on his lap. Izuku reached forward to take one of the Ramun bottles and began to drink it. It was a Sunday, so Izuku told his mom that he would be out helping with an emergency consultation with one of his students, so she wasn't expecting him back anytime soon, and he'd already texted her he was alright an hour ago. Izuku probably shouldn't drink Ramun as much as he was recently. He wasn't an alcoholic by any means, but he would make sure to only drink Ramun, and he would only drink with Nizu from now on, never with his students or anyone else. Nizu would keep him honest about it, and keep him from drinking too much, even if there was only a small amount of alcohol in Ramun. Being young, though, still meant, after drinking all, but the last one left him buzzed, and his mind was a bit floaty now. And as he was just relaxing in the safe, little bubble Nizu's office was, an idea suddenly came to him. Hey Nizu, do you think we could convince the board to make the dorms on campus if we told them about our plans to hire Yagi? The media presence will become atrocious. And considering how it disturbed the students so badly the last couple of times, we could make a case, right? Izuku asked his friend. Nizu blinked, then began chewing over the idea with a feral grin. Good. The kids shouldn't have to deal with that every time the media wants to put one of us on blast, Izuku told him. Nizu chirped in agreement and nuzzled Izuku's stomach. Want to get started on the blueprints? It will be much easier to argue with the board if we have a game plan ready, Izuku inquired, sipping on his last bottle. Nizu chirped again, jumping off the couch, then returned with some papers to draw everything up and handed Izuku some pens to get started, his tail in strong and shift wag behind him with his excitement. The two of them devolving into half-spoken, half-chirps and churs, conversation over what the dorms would need, and what they could and could not get the board to agree to give the students, and how to keep the budget down so the board wouldn't try to raise the tuition they would ask for from the students. Plus, it would be really helpful for the students that live far away or were forced to rent an apartment nearby, like Masao and had to. Plus, they could market it as a way to help the students learn to become more independent adults and good roommates for the future. And the wards of you. I could have another option for where to live, with parents being able to visit when they wanted to, and students allowed to return home for certain periods of time and on breaks. So, with his experience having made the plans for more than one apartment building and speaking with the people that lived/worked there, Izuku had a very good picture of what would be needed. Like how big the rooms for each person should be, whether they should have private and public bathrooms, and where it was best to arrange the common spaces. Nizu happily listened to him speak with his tail wagging. Ryo wasn't sure what to make of the meeting that was added to his schedule on his computer calendar. It obviously had been done by the rat. Nizu hadn't even been subtle and left his name under the meeting he put in Ryo's calendar. Ryo was at the very least certain that the meeting was not about the listed reason of consulting on a case. Nizu didn't just hack into his computer for consulting on cases. However, he also knew better than to try and skip the meeting or find out more about it before the day, since Nizu would be absolutely cryptic about it. So, he didn't and went about the 3 days in between as usual. Though he noticed that Miyake and Oswald's friend group were off, and clearly very angry, except for Togata. The boy looked more crushed than anything and hadn't wanted to talk about anything, even flinching when Ryo had gotten too close. So Ryo let the boy just do coloring therapy during the last couple of sessions. He'd be sure to bring it up during his meeting with Nizu. Something had very clearly happened, and considering how everyone in the friend group was acting, Ryo could only draw a few conclusions about the nature of it, especially with how protectively angry the group was of Togata recently. And Ryo really hoped he was wrong about one of those reasons, but if there was even a chance that that could have happened, then Nizu would undoubtedly make him pay for not bringing it to his attention sooner. Strictly speaking, Ryo had no proof of anyone doing anything to Togata, but one doesn't spend years working with all kinds of traumatized people and not pick up on certain patterns of behavior, especially when they spent even longer studying human psychology with a heavy focus on trauma and helping people move past it. The only concern he really had was trying to think of who could have done it to Togata, because there were two options, and frankly neither option was a good one if what he suspected was right. It would be bad enough if a stranger did that. Togata could reasonably stay incredibly afraid of any stranger from now on and maybe retreat into himself or become codependent on his friends. Or if his assaulter was someone he'd known personally, then Togata would definitely have a different set of severe trust issues going forward, and Nizu would need to do a deep check on Togata's life to figure out who it was. Ryo really hoped he was wrong about what he was thinking, for Togata's sake, if nothing else. The most he had gotten from any of them about what happened was Miyake's ominous warning of finding out the coming Wednesday, with a swishing tail and prickling scent of deep agitation. If he was a betting man, he'd think that the rat's meeting's time wasn't a coincidence, but he knew far better than to bet with Nizu. So, Ryo did his best to keep himself from going into the meeting without any preconceptions about it, raising an eye when he noticed that Aizawa left the teacher's offices. Aizawa, who normally wouldn't be here this late, always in a rush to go home and catch up on his sleep long before Ryo finished his end-of-the-day appointments. Aizawa and he stared at each other for a moment. Nizu, Ryo guessed rather easily. Rat BSTRD. Aizawa confirmed, and Ryo huffed. Aizawa was probably the only one that could get away with saying that so close to Nizu. The man was once his personal student. Or stupid enough from lack of sleep. It could be either of those really with his couchy. Let's get this over with then, Ryo muttered, shaking his head, and the two walked over to the rat's office. Inui-san. Aizawa. Right on time as always, come in. Nizu cheerfully told them before either of them could knock on the door. Ryo opened the door and blinked when he saw Midoriya-kun was there sitting on Nizu's chair, and the mammal contently sat on the boy's lap, the boy busy with something on his phone. There was also Haruki-san and a skeletal man with straw-like hair. And good God, did he smell of a lot of BLD now. Now, don't be shy and come on in. Nizu reminded the two of them. Ryo and Aizawa came all the way in and then settled down on the couches. You called us for a meeting, Nizu? Aizawa flatly said. Indeed, though before we speak, allow me to. Niza hopped off of Midoriya's lap to a corner, then a bunch of metal plates closed over the doors and windows, make it more private. Nizu finished before hopping back on a Midoriya's lap, then sat on his desk. Midoriya put his phone down. Given the nature of what we are going to discuss, it is important that this conversation stays unheard and needs to remain under strict confidence. Midoriya told them, a sternness in his voice and body that wasn't common in the Greenette. And what will we be discussing, Niza-san, Midoriya-san? Ryo inquired, a bit cautious in his tone since they probably were both about to find out what had caused Midoriya to be so furious the past couple of weeks. Does the name All for One mean anything to either you? Nizo asked them back. Aizawa frowned, only the barest of whispers. Most criminals don't want to speak about whoever that is. Aizawa answered, with a brow raised. I'm afraid I haven't heard anything on my side of things. Ryo admitted. Then I'm sure that you've heard the stories that came from his actions during the dawning. As he who takes, Midoriya stated, making him flinch and stare at Midoriya. Are you telling me that Aizawa about to question, but Midoriya just nodded. Yes, the quirk-stealing boogeyman is alive and very much real. Plus, he's still kicking due to some quirks he's stolen. That covers the basic questions you were going to ask Aizawa-san. Midoriya said, raising an eyebrow back. Aizawa scowled back, but didn't ask anything, irritated whiffs coming from his scent. Considering you've asked us both here, and the way we are talking about this, then I presume that this All for One is an enemy then, Ryo guessed, his first standing on end from thinking about it. You would be correct. Nizu confirmed with a soft nod. And there is already a plan in the motion to deal with him. Ryo further inquired. Well, more like he hoped there was one in the works. There is, with Midoriya-san's help, we shall be able to execute All for One and rescue 2 of his brainwash victims. There are, however, some complications in which is why we had to bring the 2 of you in and debrief you. Nizu elaborated for them. That helped and hurt in equal measure. Ryo was relieved that there was a Nizu-approved plan to get rid of All for One, but less than thrilled knowing that Midoriya-san had to be a part of executing anyone. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. What kind of complications? His kohai pointedly asked. While we are confident in the plan to kill All for One, there is also a backup plan that we shall only use as a last resort. Midoriya told them, then motioned to the blonde man. All for One had a brother with a quirk that could be passed on. I won't get into the details at the moment. But each of the holders of the quirk has done their best to fight All for One and be rid of him once and for all, myself included. The man said, I'm Yagi, the 8th holder. I won't have much longer to live. 5 years perhaps if I'm lucky, and I can't use the quirk to its full power due to the damage from the last fight I had with All for One. So we've looked for a successor. Yagi detailed for them. Ryo frowned, sharing a glance with Aizawa. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the quirk, giving it to just any person isn't possible. There were only 2 people we could find that would be able to handle the strain of inheritance. Both of them agreed to take inheritance after we insisted on over a week of consideration. Midoriya explained to them. Who are these successors? Aizawa questioned. That was one of the reasons we're bringing you and Inui-kun. The only 2 people that can handle taking inheritance without dying are Heido and Amajiki of 2A. Haruki-san answered for them. Ryo couldn't help looking at them, all shocked. What? Why them? Isn't there anyone else that would be able to take inheritance? An adult? Ryo questioned. Knowing how Midoriya hated to involve kids, it was almost a slap to the face. Midoriya scowled back at the slight. If you'll recall, I have strong connections with the Vespas, and I had them search the whole island for people that could have taken inheritance. So, I can assure you that there is no one else. Midoriya coldly answered. Ryo merely nodded his head, chastised. And do keep in mind they will only get involved if, and only if, the plan of execution fails. Regardless, they will need someone they can talk through their issues and concerns with, a professional like yourself, Inui-san. Midoriya further explained to him. And where do I fit into this picture then? Considering I wasn't approached before now, I'm not part of the plan to execute All for One. Aizawa questioned. His arms crossed. While it shall be good to have someone else for the 6 of them talk to, especially people who weren't in on this from the beginning like most of us were. But you, Aizawa-san, will be even more insurance to help kill All for One. Midoriya said, some of the tension bleeding away, though he kept his shoulders squared. We can't be sure if he has a quirk to counter your own, but at the very least you would be able to disable some of the quirks All for One would use, either to fight back or keep him from surviving by using whatever healing quirks he has. Midoriya-kun elaborated. Ryo found himself nodding along with Midoriya-kun's reasons. Erasure would be very useful to counter someone like All for One. If not a complete counter, then at least to put the man at a severe disadvantage. Aizawa-sen, however, flared with suspicion, and his constantly red eyes narrowed. If I would be so useful, then why am I only being read in now? Aizawa questioned. Ryo had given pause for that. Haruki-san placed a hand on Aizawa's shoulder. Because we couldn't trust that you would react rationally upon the reveal of one of the brainwashed victims' identities. Haruki-san told them, the air tainted by moroseness and Aizawa's bitter agitation. Clearly his kohai felt slighted. And just who would this brainwashing victim be? Aizawa spat back. Shirakumo Oboro, your best friend, Midoriya-kun replied flatly. His words hit Ryo like a gut punch, and he sharply inhaled, the smell of Aizawa's shock socking him next. Then denial overcame that. Most people didn't think denial would have a scent. It did. It often smelled sour and prickly. That's impossible. Oboro died over a decade ago. I was there. Aizawa hissed back through gritted teeth, his right hand curling on his upper left arm, where his arm had broken all that time ago. Ryo hadn't known much about that day. Aizawa and his other co-ace refused to talk about it much with anyone, and he only knew how Aizawa broke his arm because Isamu told him. Shirakumo's last act was to use his quirk to all but throw Aizawa out of a collapsing building with an injured kid, his arm breaking because Aizawa had been thrown much too strong in Shirakumo's rush. And even now, Aizawa would stink of self-hatred and mourning whenever it was brought up, especially now. Replacing the body with a double would have been child's play to All for One, if he didn't just pay off the officials to lie. That was All for One's plan in the first place after all. Midoriya-kun countered, taking to stay neutral on the surface. Though even without his nose, Ryo could tell the boy took no joy in telling this to Aizawa. What the F do you mean by that? Aizawa snapped back, rage spilling over, and Aizawa's quirk flared as he stood up. Midoriya-kun didn't so much as flinch. The building collapse was not an accident, Aizawa-san. It was a planned disaster in order for All for One to successfully fake your death and kidnap you. Midoriya-kun answered, staring Aizawa head-on. Ryo could tell that was not what Aizawa was expecting to hear as his quirk dropped, his hair falling limp as his heart stopped for a brief moment. Why? Aizawa said through gritted teeth, not wanting to show how shaken he was, despite the fact Ryo was sure everyone could see that his body was trembling, and his fists were white from how tightly they were clenched. Midoriya-kun stared back at Aizawa blankly. You can't be that naive, Aizawa-san. You know exactly why All for One would want you. Midoriya-kun responded, not unkindly, but it left Ryo just as cold regardless. Yes, he could see exactly what All for One would want with a quirk like Aizawa's. Even though they weren't as close, Ryo complaining about how much of a hypocrite he was and hated that the man refused to acknowledge half of the baggage he had. But Ryo couldn't help feeling his heart drop at the thought of Aizawa being written off as dead when some BSDRD had taken him as some kind of tool. The same way that Shirakumo apparently had. Though Ryo couldn't let him think about that for long as he had to tackle Aizawa to the ground. Aizawa fought him, and they ended up tussling on the ground, with him eventually pinning Aizawa underneath himself as Aizawa loudly cursed him out. Aizawa's pure and utter anguish, hatred, spite, and self-loathing burned Ryo's nose. But he didn't move and forced Aizawa to ride out the wave of realization on the floor rather than letting Aizawa strangle the first person he could get his hands on. Ryo had always suspected that Aizawa blamed himself for that day, and that was part of why Aizawa treated himself so terribly in some sort of misplaced guilt for what happened. So, to have someone all but say that it was his fault, even if that was only how Aizawa's ears were twisting it to sound, would of course have him spiraling somewhat. Still, Ryo couldn't help feeling just awful for his kohai. Aizawa quickly stopped struggling and only could be heard taking deep body-racking breaths as he quietly sobbed. Haruki-san moved to kneel next to them and motioned for him to get off of Aizawa. Rio did so, and Haruki-san was quick to gather Aizawa into her arms and hug him close, letting Aizawa bury his face to hide from the rest of them as he processed everything, with Haruki-san gently stroking his hair. The fact Haruki-san was long considered the mother of Yu was often joked about, but in times like this it was a cold reminder of why everyone called her that. Haruki-san was frankly the closest thing to a real mother to a lot of students, and Aizawa was no expectation. "I'm sorry this was how you had to find out Shoyuta, but we're going to save him. Shirakumo's going to come back to us. We're going to bring him home, Shoyuta. I promise we'll help him." Haruki-san swore as she held Aizawa close to her. Rio chanced a glance back at Midoriya-kun, the boy looking as miserable as his scent smelt, and Nizu was back in his lap, trying to comfort the boy since he too could probably smell his emotions as well. Midoriya-kun's eyes met his, and his heart sank even more, because he could tell that there was even more that they needed to talk about. Not now, though. Aizawa, Shoyuta came first right now. Rio moved to be pressed against Shoyuta. His kohai did much better with physical comfort. He had learned that over the many years of knowing Shoyuta, words would fall on deaf ears. Being there was what mattered to his Kauchi, and Rio could do that for him. Rio wasn't sure what to make of the meeting that was added to his schedule on his computer calendar. It obviously had been done by the rat. Nizu hadn't even been subtle and left his name under the meeting he put in Rio's calendar. Rio was at the very least certain that the meeting was not about the listed reason of consulting on a case. Nizu didn't just hack into his computer for consulting on cases. However, he also knew better than to try and skip the meeting or find out more about it before the day of, since Nizu would be absolutely cryptic about it. So, he didn't and went about the 3 days in between as usual. Though he noticed that Miyake and Oswald's friend group were off and clearly very angry, except for Togata. The boy looked more crushed than anything and hadn't wanted to talk about anything, even flinching when Rio had gotten too close. So Rio let the boy just do coloring therapy during the last couple of sessions. He'd be sure to bring it up during his meeting with Nizu. Something had very clearly happened, and considering how everyone in the friend group was acting, Rio could only draw a few conclusions about the nature of it, especially with how protectively angry the group was of Togata recently. And Rio really hoped he was wrong about one of those reasons, but if there was even a chance that that could have happened, then Nizu would undoubtedly make him pay for not bringing it to his attention sooner. Strictly speaking, Rio had no proof of anyone doing anything to Togata, but one doesn't spend years working with all kinds of traumatized people and not pick up on certain patterns of behavior, especially when they spent even longer studying human psychology with a heavy focus on trauma and helping people move past it. The only concern he really had was trying to think of who could have done it to Togata, because there were two options, and frankly neither option was a good one if what he suspected was right. It would be bad enough if a stranger did that. Togata could reasonably stay incredibly afraid of any stranger from now on and maybe retreat into himself, or become codependent on his friends. Or if his assaulter was someone he'd known personally, then Togata would definitely have a different set of severe trust issues going forward, and Nizu would need to do a deep check on Togata's life to figure out who it was. Rio really hoped he was wrong about what he was thinking, for Togata's sake, if nothing else. The most he had gotten from any of them about what happened was Miyake's ominous warning of finding out the coming Wednesday, with a swishing tail and prickling scent of deep agitation. If he was a betting man, he'd think that the rat's meeting's time wasn't a coincidence, but he knew far better than to bet with Nizu. So, Rio did his best to keep himself from going into the meeting without any preconceptions about it. Raising an eye when he noticed that Aizawa left the teacher's offices, Aizawa, who normally wouldn't be here this late, always in a rush to go home and catch up on his sleep long before Rio finished his end-of-the-day appointments. Aizawa and he stared at each other for a moment. Nizu, Rio guessed rather easily. Rat BSTRD, Aizawa confirmed, and Rio huffed. Aizawa was probably the only one that could get away with saying that so close to Nizu. The man was once his personal student. Or stupid enough from lack of sleep. It could be either of those really with his Kauchi. Let's get this over with then. Rio muttered, shaking his head, and the two walked over to the rat's office. Inui-san. Aizawa. Right on time as always, come in. Nizu cheerfully told them before either of them could knock on the door. Rio opened the door and blinked when he saw Midoriya-kun was there sitting on Nisa's chair, and the mammal contently sat on the boy's lap, the boy busy with something on his phone. There was also Haruki-san and a skeletal man with straw-like hair. And good God, did he smell of a lot of BLD now. Now, don't be shy and come on in. Nizu reminded the two of them. Rio and Aizawa came all the way in and then settled down on the couches. You called us for a meeting, Nizu? Aizawa flatly said. Indeed, though before we speak, allow me to. Nisa hopped off of Midoriya-kun's lap to a corner, then a bunch of metal plates closed over the doors and windows, make it more private. Nisa finished before hopping back onto Midoriya-kun's lap, then sat on his desk. Midoriya-kun put his phone down. Given the nature of what we are going to discuss, it is important that this conversation stays unheard and needs to remain under strict confidence. Midoriya-kun told them, a sternness in his voice and body that wasn't common in the Greenette. And what will we be discussing, Nisa-san, Midoriya-san? Rio inquired, a bit cautious in his tone since they probably were both about to find out what had caused Midoriya-kun to be so furious the past couple of weeks. Does the name All for One mean anything to either you? Nisa asked them back. Aizawa frowned, only the barest of whispers. Most criminals don't want to speak about whoever that is. Aizawa answered, with a brow raised. I'm afraid I haven't heard anything on my side of things. Rio admitted. Then I'm sure that you've heard the stories that came from his actions during the dawning. As he who takes, Midoriya-kun stated, making him flinch and stare at Midoriya-kun. Are you telling me that Aizawa about to question, but Midoriya-kun just nodded. Yes, the quirk-stealing boogeyman is alive and very much real, plus he's still kicking due to some quirks he's stolen. That covers the basic questions you were going to ask Aizawa-san. Midoriya said, raising an eyebrow back. Aizawa scowled back, but didn't ask anything, irritated whiffs coming from his scent. Considering you've asked us both here, and the way we are talking about this, then I presume that this All for One is an enemy then, Rio guessed, his first standing on end from thinking about it. You would be correct, Nizu confirmed with a soft nod. And there is already a plan in the motion to deal with him. Rio further inquired. Well, more like he hoped there was one in the works. There is, with Midoriya-san's help, we shall be able to execute All for One and rescue 2 of his brainwashed victims. There are, however, some complications, in which is why we had to bring the 2 of you in and debrief you. Nizu elaborated for them. That helped and hurt in equal measure. Rio was relieved that there was a Nizu-approved plan to get rid of All for One, but less than thrilled knowing that Midoriya-san had to be a part of executing anyone. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. What kind of complications? His Kohai pointedly asked. While we are confident in the plan to kill All for One, there is also a backup plan that we shall only use as a last resort. Midoriya told them, then motioned to the blonde man. All for One had a brother with a quirk that could be passed on. I won't get into the details of the moment, but each of the holders of the quirk has done their best to fight All for One and be rid of him once and for all, myself included. The man said, I'm Yagi, the 8th holder. I won't have much longer to live, 5 years perhaps if I'm lucky, and I can't use the quirk to its full power due to the damage from the last fight I had with All for One. So we've looked for a successor. Yagi detailed for them. Rio frowned, sharing a glance with Aizawa. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the quirk, giving it to just any person isn't possible. There were only 2 people we could find that would be able to handle the strain of inheritance. Both of them agreed to take inheritance after we insisted on over a week of consideration. Midoriya-kun explained to them. Who are these successors? Aizawa questioned. That was one of the reasons we're bringing you in Inui-kun. The only 2 people that can handle taking inheritance without dying are Hado and Amajiki of 2A. Haruki-san answered for them. Rio couldn't help looking at them, all shocked. What? Why them? Isn't there anyone else that would be able to take inheritance? An adult? Rio questioned. Knowing how Midoriya-kun hated to involve kids, it was almost a slap to the face. Midoriya-kun scowled back at the slight. If you'll recall, I have strong connections with the Vespas, and I had them search the whole island for people that could have taken inheritance. So, I can assure you that there is no one else. Midoriya-kun coldly answered. Rio merely nodded his head, chastised. And do keep in mind they will only get involved if, and only if, the plan of execution fails. Regardless, They will need someone they can talk through their issues and concerns with, a professional like yourself, Inui-san. Midoriya-kun further explained to him. And where do I fit into this picture then? Considering I wasn't approached before now, I'm not part of the plan to execute all for one. Aizawa questioned, his arms crossed. While it shall be good to have someone else for the six of them talk to, especially people who weren't in on this from the beginning like most of us were. But you, Aizawa-san, will be even more insurance to help kill all for one. Midoriya-kun said, some of the tension bleeding away, though he kept his shoulders squared. We can't be sure if he has a quirk to counter your own, but at the very least you would be able to disable some of the quirks all for one would use, either to fight back or keep him from surviving by using whatever healing quirks he has. Midoriya-kun elaborated. Ryo found himself nodding along with Midoriya-kun's reasons. Erasure would be very useful to counter someone like all for one. If not a complete counter, then at least to put the man at a severe disadvantage. Aizawa's scent, however, flared with suspicion, and his constantly red eyes narrowed. If I would be so useful, then why am I only being read in now? Aizawa questioned. Ryo had given pause for that. Haruki-san placed a hand on Aizawa's shoulder. Because we couldn't trust that you would react rationally upon the reveal of one of the brainwashed victims' identities. Haruki-san told them, the air tainted by moroseness and Aizawa's bitter agitation. Clearly his kohai felt slighted. And just who would this brainwashing victim be? Aizawa spat back. Shirakumo Oboro, your best friend. Midoriya-kun replied flatly. His words hit Ryo like a gut punch, and he sharply inhaled, the smell of Aizawa's shock socking him next. Then denial overcame that. Most people didn't think denial would have a scent. It did. It often smelt sour and prickly. That's impossible. Oboro died over a decade ago. I was there. Aizawa hissed back through gritted teeth, his right hand curling on his upper left arm, where his arm had broken all that time ago. Ryo hadn't known much about that day. Aizawa and his other co-ace refused to talk about it much, with anyone, and he only knew how Aizawa broke his arm because Isamu told him. Shirakumo's last act was to use his quirk to all, but throw Aizawa out of a collapsing building with an injured kid. His arm breaking because Aizawa had been thrown much too strong in Shirakumo's rush. And even now, Aizawa would stink of self-hatred and mourning whenever it was brought up, especially now. Replacing the body with a double would have been child's play to all for one, if he didn't just pay off the officials to lie. That was all for one's plan in the first place after all. Midoriya-kun countered, taking to stay neutral on the surface. Though even without his nose, Ryo could tell the boy took no joy in telling this to Aizawa. What the F do you mean by that? Aizawa snapped back, rage spilling over, and Aizawa's quirk flared as he stood up. Midoriya-kun didn't so much as flinch. The building collapse was not an accident, Aizawa-san. It was a planned disaster in order for all for one to successfully fake your death and kidnap you. Midoriya-kun answered, staring Aizawa head-on. Ryo could tell that was not what Aizawa was expecting to hear as his quirk dropped, his hair falling limp as his heart stopped for a brief moment. Why? Aizawa said through gritted teeth, not wanting to show how shaken he was, despite the fact Ryo was sure everyone could see that his body was trembling, and his fists were white from how tightly they were clenched. Midoriya-kun stared back at Aizawa blankly. You can't be that naive, Aizawa-san. You know exactly why all for one would want you. Midoriya-kun responded, not unkindly, but it left Ryo just as cold regardless. Yes, he could see exactly what all for one would want with a quirk like Aizawa's. Even though they weren't as close. Ryo complaining about how much of a hypocrite he was and hated that the man refused to acknowledge half of the baggage he had. But Ryo couldn't help feeling his heart drop at the thought of Aizawa being written off as dead when some BSDRD had taken him as some kind of tool. The same way that Shirakumo apparently had. Though Ryo couldn't let him think about that for long as he had to tackle Aizawa to the ground. Aizawa fought him, and they ended up tussling on the ground, with him eventually pinning Aizawa underneath himself as Aizawa loudly cursed him out. Aizawa's pure and utter anguish, hatred, spite, and self-loathing burned Ryo's nose. But he didn't move and forced Aizawa to ride out the wave of realization on the floor rather than letting Aizawa strangle the first person he could get his hands on. Rio had always suspected that Aizawa blamed himself for that day, and that was part of why Aizawa treated himself so terribly in some sort of misplaced guilt for what happened. So, to have someone all but say that it was his fault, even if that was only how Aizawa's ears were twisting it to sound, would of course have him spiraling somewhat. Still, Rio couldn't help feeling just awful for his Kohai. Aizawa quickly stopped struggling and only could be heard taking deep, body-racking breaths as he quietly sobbed. Haruki-san moved to kneel next to them and motioned for him to get off of Aizawa. Rio did so, and Haruki-san was quick to gather Aizawa into her arms and hug him close, letting Aizawa bury his face to hide from the rest of them as he processed everything, with Haruki-san gently stroking his hair. The fact Haruki-san was long considered the mother of Yu was often joked about, but in times like this it was a cold reminder of why everyone called her that. Haruki-san was frankly the closest thing to a real mother to a lot of students, and Aizawa was no expectation. "I'm sorry this was how you had to find out Shoyuta, but we're going to save him. Shirakumo's going to come back to us. We're going to bring him home Shoyuta. I promise we'll help him." Haruki-san swore as she held Aizawa close to her. Rio chanced to glance back at Midoriya-kun, the boy looking as miserable as his scent smelt, and Nizu was back in his lap, trying to comfort the boy since he too could probably smell his emotions as well. Midoriya-kun's eyes met his, and his heart sank even more because he could tell that there was even more that they needed to talk about. Not now, though. Aizawa, Shoyuta came first right now. Rio moved to be pressed against Shoyuta. His Kohai did much better with physical comfort. He had learned that over the many years of knowing Shoyuta, words would fall on deaf ears. Being there was what mattered to his Kauchi, and Rio could do that for him. Hawks did his best to grin and mingle with the other heroes at the ball before the billboard would be announced. But it was pretty strong to do that when all anyone seemed to want to talk about was the controversy over Zuri, and more specifically needle him about his reasons to believe that two toes were equal to them. Hawks had never hated his carefree attitude more than that night. His wings tense from keeping them in a relaxed pose intense of the aggressive and protective stance they wanted to take. He wanted nothing more than a snap at the 100th person who questioned him, some C-lister that made Hawks want to snap back at him with something like, "And how useful is your laser quirk in the bedroom?" Huh. Hawks, though, kept his easy grin and played it off jokingly, like he was supposed to. Thankfully, not everyone was a bigot that made him wish he had his talons back. Ryukyu was nice to speak with, the two of them discussing how they felt in the air and how freeing it could be to fly above it all sometimes. Or with Gang Orca, he knew Zuri liked the man and could easily see why. The man was so easy to talk to, and he would absolutely try the seafood things that Gang Orca mentioned. He was sure Zuri wouldn't mind helping him get it. He wondered if shrimp would taste like crunchy chicken to him too. He really wanted to know. He didn't know why he hadn't before now, especially when he knew that it would probably have a good crunch to it. He had been looking forward to asking about how Haku's internship with Best Jeanist was, but the man's answers were lacking. Best Jeanist was stiff, but Gang Orca seemed to like him, so there had to be some redeeming factors to him. But Best Jeanist reminded Hawks a bit too much of his handlers, seeming to be too wrapped up in his image and public opinion. But most idol heroes were like that, Hawks supposed. Mirko was annoyingly frustrating when he ran into her, though she at least wasn't bigoted as well, and when a random reporter there from one of the negative news outlets asked her about her thoughts on Two Toes, he was pleasantly surprised by her answer. She grinned fairly at the reporter and told him, "If any of those guys think they could stand toe-to-toe with me, I say let him. I want a challenge from someone that could hold their own without any of the fancy CRP." Not the most uplifting, but knowing how aggressive Mirko was and how she looked at most people, her saying they could stand toe-to-toe with her was a huge compliment. Mirko prided herself on her strength to break concrete with a single kick after all, so yeah, it soothed some of Hawks irritably knowing that Mirko also thought of Two Toes being just regular people. Then before Hawks knew it, it was time to announce the billboard. Hawks wished that they had told him what his placing was again this year. He could only assume that his ranking was the same as last year's, since his handlers would have definitely had some strong words with him if he dropped in ranking. Everyone was shuffled into the large, hall-like area where they would film and live stream the billboard for the public. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's coverage of Japan's Hero Chart. apologizes to the folks for it being a month late, but the system had far more votes to deal with than in previous years. Amy, the chosen HPSC employee for this year's announcements, cheerfully announced throughout the stadium. There were always a lot of heroes here for the event. Everyone in the top 300 was invited and eager for a chance at taking one of the top spots and hoping to be called up to the stage. So, let's not keep any of you waiting any longer. Now for our new number 10 of Japan, the rabbit hero, Mirko. Amy announced after opening of the envelopes. Mirko grinned as she hopped up to the stage, a feral and smug look on her face that was well-deserved. Mirko had jumped from the hundreds to the top 10 of the chart, even if she was more on the bitches side of things. So, he clapped with everyone else. "Any words you want to say, Mirko?" Amy asked, offering a mic. "You better get used to my face, 'cause I'm only going up in the World F airs." Mirko proudly told them, and Hawks hoped the censors were working to cover that little F-bomb. Right, and though he slipped from 6th, he's still going strong. "You're number 9, the equipped hero, Yoroi Musha," Amy exclaimed, and the veteran hero stood and walked up to the stage and declined to speak like he did most years. Dozens of cheers and clapping for the man who'd been their hero for almost as long as All Might had been. Now for our new number 8, the dragon hero, Ryukyu. "Please come up and say a few words," Amy declared. Ryukyu walked up to the stage stunned. "Thank you all, but I don't think I deserve to have placed this high," Ryukyu told the crowd, her gratitude clear as she looked abashed standing next to Yoroi. "You wouldn't be up here if you hadn't worked for it, Ryukyu," Amy told her before turning back to the crowd. "And now for a familiar face. You're returning number 7, the shield hero, Crust," Amy yelled, the man walking up with a big grin. "I am honored you all still think I've done such a great job and hope to keep impressing you," Crust proudly told the crowd before standing next to Ryukyu, everyone cheering for him, even louder than when he walked up to the stage. Now let's all give our new number 6, jumping up 3 rankings, the ninja hero, Ed Shot, Amy said, clapping with the crowd as Ed Shot walked up the stage. "I shall make sure your faith in me and the responsibilities now given to me are not misplaced," Ed Shot promised, nodding his head to the cheering crowd before taking his place. "And now let us welcome our number 5, the Dash." Amy paused, her eyes going wide, and she double-checked the card before continuing. "To the Hellfire hero, Endeavor," Amy said, and the crowd fell silent, just as shocked. Hawks' own mouth would have fallen open if he wasn't trained so well. Endeavor had been the number 2 for nearly as long as All Might had been the number 1, give or take a few years, and to have him fall to the 5th so suddenly was a jaw-dropping realization. Sure, speaking more openly with Zuri had given him some heartbreaking revelations about the man, but he still had a very long and proud career behind him. Maybe going down a rank to 3 would be understandable. It had happened once before, but slipping all the way down to 5. And Endeavor certainly didn't like this slip as he stormed past Amy and stood scowling next to Ed Shot, his flames whipping more dangerously. Amy needed a second before she continued with announcing the charts. "All right, next is someone we should all give a big hand for. Raising through the charts with great speed to the number 4, the killer whale hero, Gang Orca," Amy said, still a little shaken up, and some confused clapping came from the crowd. Gang Orca, also stunned but probably worst with jumping so high in the rankings, managed to get up to the stage and hesitated when Amy offered him the mic. "This is a big surprise, but I'm very grateful for the support of all of you to allow me to reach this point in my life," Gang Orca told the crowd before standing in place, though a touch of standing too closely to Endeavor. Hawk's heart dropped slightly. That was supposed to be his spot. As shaken as he was, he knew that he should have been told sometime from his handlers if he slipped or raised in place, or maybe they wanted to have him react genuinely to rising to number 3. "Thank you, Gang Orca. Now next for our number 3 for 10 years running Best Jeanist," Amy said, crushing that hope in Hawks as the crowd began clapping and cheering in earnest once they returned to their senses. Hawks only stared on numbly as Best Jeanist walked up looking as cool as a cucumber and gave the usual speech, probably before standing next to Gang Orca, fear prickling on Hawks as he wondered how he could have fallen from the top 10. Though maybe it shouldn't have been such a surprise to him with how many people seemed to hate Two Toes like Zuri, and he'd been publicly their biggest defender. And maybe the commission also expected that. Maybe that was why the commission hadn't punished him, because it was an expected and planned for result of his mission to get closer to Zuri. Not being in the top 10 would make him seem easier to approach after all. And now, for a first in all of history, we shall have our youngest number 2 hero in Japan. Welcome your number 2, the wing hero, Hawks. Ami suddenly said, breaking Hawks out of his thoughts as the spotlight landed on him. The sound of a record scratch would have been appropriate in that moment. Asterisk what? Asterisk Hawks questioned in his mind as his body moved up to the stage automatically. How had he overtaken Endeavor as the number 2? How, when he hadn't been around for more than a couple of years, did he manage to overtake heroes that have been doing this since before he was even born? And it wasn't like he could overcome the others in popularity, when everyone seemed to have a problem with his stance on 2 toes and defending Zuri all the time. Do you have anything you want to say to everyone at home, Hawks? Ami asked him, and his mind blanked again. The PR pitch his handlers burned into him was on the tip of his tongue, but it felt so sour, and he didn't feel right saying it here and now. Despite this, his hand reached out and took the mic. And he looked out to see the crowd, briefly wondering if this was how Haku felt when she spoke out to the stadium. Suddenly it clicked in place. Zuri's students. They knew that Zuri loved him, that Zuri and he were friends. They must have been why he was the number 2 now. Hawk's heart leapt in his chest and warmth flooded him. A much more natural smile taking over his face, and tears pricked the corners of his eyes. I never expected to get here, not this fast anyways, but I'm grateful. And to those of you that helped me get here, thank you for believing in me so much that you helped me get here. You all know who you are. Hawk said, lacking a lot of the substance or hidden meanings the HPSC would want from him. But as the crowd started clapping and knowing that his words would reach the ones that got him here, and that they would hear the truth in his words made up for it, Hawks handed the mic over and stood over with Best Jeanist. Then Ami turned away from the stage. And now, the man that needs no introduction, you're my number 1 hero for 35 years and counting, the symbol of peace, All Might. Ami shouted, the crowd all loudly clapping and cheering. All Might walking up to the crowd, his signature grin on his face, chuckling as he walked up to the stage with a wave to the crowd. Ami gave him the mic, stepping aside so that he could make the speech that was expected of him. Thank you, you are all much too kind, All Might told everyone, waving his free hand with a chuckle, waiting for everyone to quiet down before he continued to speak. I am sure that many of you expect me to make the same speech I give you every time this time of the year comes around, where I tell you that I don't quite deserve such an honor. All Might said, his hand coming to rest on his hip, and to praise the everyday heroes that you see every day, but I'm afraid that there is something more important that I need to tell you all this time. All Might explained, his tone turning more somber than usual. Hawks stared at All Might. What could the man have to tell everyone? I know that for many of you, I have not been one of the top heroes, but the number 1 hero, and that you cannot think of a world where I am not the symbol of peace. All Might admitted, his eyes lowered, and he took a deep breath, bowing his head. But I'm afraid that world is coming sooner than you think. All Might confessed, shocking everyone, as many people gasped. Ryukyu even covered her mouth with both hands. Hawks wasn't doing much better, staring at the back of All Might's bowed head. I'm sure this has come as a shock to many of you, but I've had many fights with very strong villains, and have worked for a very long time day in and out in just about every country on Earth. All Might said, sounding more tired than he had ever heard All Might being in his life. And I'm only going to get older, and as strong as my quirk makes me, it cannot reverse the effects of time, so as of the start of next year, in the best interest for my health, I shall be stepping down from full-time hero work to only part-time work. All Might confessed, with everyone hanging off his every word. Shouts of surprise ringing through the room, and Hawk's mouth opened slightly, his wings lowering just a touch. If All Might started working part-time, then he wouldn't qualify for the top 500, much less the top 10, and All Might being anything other than the number 1 was just unthinkable. His stomach turned in knots at the thought of it. All Might raised his hand to silence the crowd. Now, I understand that this change will be scary for many of you, and that many of you will be worried for the future now that I will be stepping down. All Might gently told them with sympathy. But your worries are for nothing. I may be unmatched, but I am not the only hero who's been protecting the world. All Might told them with a chuckle, then he walked over to Hawks and threw a hand around his shoulders. Hawks fought not to jump from the action. There are hundreds of very competent heroes that I am fully confident that will be able to handle whatever the world throws at them. In fact, I think this will be a change for the better for everyone. All Might assured everyone, his voice becoming soft-spoken but confident. Before I became a hero, the world was in turmoil, and everyone was looking wherever they could for even a scrap of hope, myself included. All Might confessed, a heaviness to his words that left the air thick. I am here, All Might said next. Those were the words my mother told me whenever I was scared as a child. The comfort those words brought me over the years, even after she passed, are indescribable. And each time I would tell myself them, I would remind myself of how, despite everything going wrong in the world at that time in my life, my mother was always there for me no matter what. All Might explained to them that every time she said, I am here, it was a promise, one she kept till the day she passed. All Might's words becoming somber once again. And ever since I became a hero, I've been making that same promise to you. All Might told them, tugging on everyone's heartstrings. A promise that I shall keep to you, regardless of whether I'm a hero or not. Because even when the day I retire from hero work altogether does come, I shall simply move on to help you in the same way that every person can help. All Might said, his confidence returning to him as he puffed up even more. Because no matter what, whether as a hero or a civilian, using my voice to protect others in the ways they need the most. All Might grinning at the crowd with his normal toothy smile. I am here, he promised, his eyes glowing slightly. The crowd erupted with cheering and clapping so loudly that Hawk's ears were ringing from the noise, and he simply stared up at All Might in awe. Because for the first time in his life, Hawks felt he finally understood the weight of those words, a few tears slipping from his eyes as he stood beside Japan's greatest hero. Elmo Vespa to the districts. I purpose a deal. Elmo, I get you to vote in the hero billboard, and you get to ruin Endeavor. Elmo, and to sweeten the deal, you'll be helping Deku-Sensei. Another Vespa. Sir, you had them at ruin. Endeavor. Elmo. Good. Now help me WHB up some 100% legal IDs for them to vote with. Tamaki had many times where he felt helpless. His anxiety did not help that feeling, and on the rare occasion the two would drown him in a doom spiral. His time at U8, being so supported by his friends, had helped him prop up his confidence. Tamaki had even been able to give an ORL report without Miyake-san standing next to him like usual. Part of that was because he had been taught how to handle a lot of things, MSTR-sensei, teaching him a lot about medicine and growing in leaps and bounds with his quirk to the point he was able to keep Miyake on his toes. The other part, admittedly, was hanging out with his friends. All of the interaction helping to desensitize him to other personality types, like Oswald-san's passive-aggressiveness and Miyake-san's stoicness. He still had his hang-ups, though, tripping up whenever there was a big thing that happened, like Oswald-san kissing his forehead and not being able to go into malls alone ever now. Or more recently, learning that his first and best friend had secretly been groomed right under their noses without any of them noticing. Nothing before that moment had ever made him feel so bad before. Because it wasn't like the grooming was being hidden from them, like Mirio had hidden the bullying from them. Mirio did his training in front of them. They had seen the training plans from Sir that Mirio was given, and sometimes they did the same exercises with him some days. He had personally helped Togata-san in cooking the suggested dishes that Sir recommended for Mirio's health. Mirio had always told him of when he was going to see Sir at his agency and returned only a few minutes before sunset, for multiple days a week, often in a row. And not once did he question any of this, or raise any red flags in Tamaki's mind when it should have. Tamaki's ORL report was on the signs of grooming and the commonly seen behaviors from victims of it before and after they realized their groomer's intentions, for Pete's sake. But he'd been completely blind to what Sir was doing to Mirio and Mirio's own slight discomfort from unconsciously picking up on something being off. Because a lot of Mirio's seemingly innocent questions and offhanded comments began popping to the forefront of his mind. "Hey, Sonny Fagum buys you lunch too, right?" "Yes, sir." Got this kind of funny look when he saw my hair was long again, but he said it looked good on me, so. "Thanks for the offer, Oz, but I really want her to be proud of me for sticking to my diet." And yet somehow, despite all of the warning signs being waved right in front of their faces, they hadn't noticed any of it was going on. So, yeah, once Inu-san was finally read in about the all-for-one and the inheritance situation, Tamaki spilled all of that to him. Thankful he could finally talk about it with Inu-san. He really needed to talk with him about these feelings that just kept growing like a lead weight in his CHSD. Inu-san was as comforting about it as always, reminding him that it wasn't a common form of grooming and that he wasn't experienced enough in the field of heroics to recognize what Sir was doing wasn't normal, which wasn't helping him as much as Tamaki wished it would. And that wasn't even touching on the other part of the problem, because he wasn't the only one that was taking the news badly. Nijire-chan was indescribably angry and had taken to working her body to the breaking point in rage workouts, mainly because they weren't allowed to go after Sir, and he, quote, steal his kneecaps. Nijire-chan had also spent nearly every day after school sparring with Izawa-sensei with Heya, the both of them wanting to get more hand-to-hand experience since both felt they needed to work in that area. Both focused more on their quirks and long-distance combat than close combat before and all, but cornered Izawa-sensei to teach them how to do hand-to-hand. He wasn't sure why Izawa-sensei agreed, but he suspected that Izawa-sensei was also very upset about the whole situation since the man kept scowling recently. Miyake. Tamaki was pretty sure he was scheming with Oswald on how to make Sir's life as horrid as they could without access to proper resources to do so. And he wasn't sure he wanted to stop them or offer to help them, because as he told Inu-san, he really wanted to bite Sir and wanted his life ruined for grooming Mirio. Then there was Mirio. Mirio hadn't taken the news well at all. His friend going through the motions at the school, and for the first time since internship week, Mirio went home early and just laid in his bed and did nothing for the rest of the day. Tamaki had shut down once or twice before. He shut down very recently when Oswald-san asked him out, and like always, Mirio did his best to talk him around. And he wanted so badly to return the favor and help Mirio now that he really needed someone to lean on. But unfortunately, he wasn't as good at comforting people, much less for something of this kind. So, the same helplessness he felt before had turned from somewhat dread building to something ever so vicious, digging claws deeper and deeper into his heart every time he saw Mirio's dull eyes, and he couldn't do much more than offer words that tasted like ash and rang hollow even in his own ears. Claws that heated up like burning coals whenever someone outside of their circle asked them what was up with Mirio. He knew most of them were well-meaning, but something ugly coiled up inside of him when even Mirio's classmates began to ask after him. "So now you care." Tamaki felt those venomous words waiting to be spat back into B's faces. He never would. It would only make him feel worse, and Mirio would blame himself somehow. Instead, he took a page out of Nijire-chan's book and released all that venom in his training to take inheritance, practicing something that Mirio had suggested to him long ago and had finally worked himself up to trying it out in earnest. Chimerism. True chimerism. He'd only done minor changes before now, things like how he used the reinforced strength of an ant along with Miyake-san's quirk during the sports festival. Now, though, perhaps the act coming with such unnatural ease to him with the aid of his volatile emotions, chimerism felt almost like second nature. Like today, Tamaki had finished with his session with Inu-san for the day, and Inu-san had taken him to the small, forested area to practice. Tamaki took out his lunchbox and was quick to devour its contents. The few shards of crystal, a fong of some canine, some of Miyake-san's scales, and a small lock of Oswald-san's hair were all gone in seconds. The now empty box was set on the jeep that Inu-san used to bring him here, and he rolled his shoulders. Tamaki took a deep breath, and once he could feel each of the things he ate buzz under his skin, he drew upon them and pulled them up and over his skin. As his bones began to shift and violet-colored scales pushed out of the pores of his skin, Tamaki's thoughts went back to the night Oswald-san had come so suddenly and placed his heart in his hands. Does the stuff you grow ever feel like there's more of it in you than you in your hands after you use your quirk? His words were shocking and concerning in equal measure in ways he hadn't been able to understand before. Now, though Tamaki thought he was finally grasping what Oswald-san had meant. Looking at his fully transformed hand, it looked nothing like a human hand now. Shimmering violet scales covered all of the skin, large black talons made of crystal, as well on all 5 fingers that would bend back and reliably tear straight through everything he sunk them in so far. For all it had changed, it was still his hand, but it wasn't strong either to dissociate from it since so much of it wasn't him anymore. Shaking the thoughts away, he moved to stand on all 4s instead, drawing even more upon Oswald-san's quirk, and his body shifted until a second set of arms formed. Testing the new limbs briefly, flexing the fingers before planting his new palms firmly on the ground. Then he ran, bolting through the trees with his claws ripping through the ground as easily as his human ones would run through sand until he finally found his target. A metal deer that only had the time to raise its head in alarm before he lunged. An animatronic shriek rang in the air before Tamaki bit down on the deer's neck, and it was silenced. Black oil and whatever fluid was used to fuel the machine filled his mouth, in a manner Tamaki was sure BLD would have if it were a real animal. Only when the deer stopped moving did Tamaki release the now dead machine's neck, making sure to flick his tongue out to take in the metal deer's scent. Oil, the burning taste and scent of fuel, and peppermint this time. Raising his head, he tasted the air for more hints of peppermint, since that was the chosen scent Izuku gave the herd of metal deer this time around. Had he been offered to train this way when he first started, Tamaki would not have entertained the idea of hunting even metal animals like this, but things were different now. There were monsters of men that walked the earth, and he could not afford to hold back in fear of acting like the yokai from his aunt's stories. His friends could not afford him to hesitate if the time came, and he needed to fight with Nijire-chan against All for One. That was why Tamaki agreed to training like this, so that he could become not only desensitized to biting into living flesh, but tracking in a scent-rich area, one where animals and machines alike would travel through. He was quick and perhaps a bit cruel as he tracked the rest of the metal herd down, either killing them like the first metal deer, or grabbing them by the head and slamming the metal deer's head into the ground or a nearby tree. It was only after he killed the last of them did the low howl of Inu-san call him back to the edge of the woods. Tamaki rushed back before releasing what he had eaten and the buzzing sliding back under his skin, ready to be pulled back to the surface at a moment's notice should he need it. Inu-san offered him a water bottle and a towel with a sad smile. Tamaki took both and cleaned off the large stains of oil all over him. Then once Inu-san had turned around, Tamaki changed out of the gym clothes he didn't care much for and in a part of his uniform, getting into the jeep and sipping on the water as Inu-san drove them back. Anxiety pooled in his stomach because today was the day, the last day of term, and the day when he was supposed to finally take inheritance along with Nijire-chan. The jeep suddenly stopped, and Tamaki turned to Inu-san, wondering why he had chosen to stop. In all of the trips Tamaki had taken to the woods, Inu-san had never stopped midway back, though. Inu-san, Tamaki hesitantly called, and Inu-san placed a hand on his shoulder. Amajiki-kun, you're about to make a very big choice, one a lot of people would never be able to make. I just want you to know that I am so proud of how strong you've become all these years. Inu-san told him, his hand squeezing Tamaki's shoulder, staring at him in a meaningful way that made a lump form in Tamaki's throat. You don't need to say anything. I just needed you to know that I'm proud of you regardless of what happens next, kiddo. Inu-san said a few seconds later, then turned the jeep back on, and then they were back on their way to the main building. Tamaki stared at Inu-san for another second, then let his eyes move to look outside the window. The dread that wanted to form before, lightening somewhat, still there, but it wouldn't have drowned him like it would have if Inu-san remained silent. Tamaki could only hope that the vote of confidence was not misplaced. Nijire stood waiting with Yu and Izawa-sensei in the medical wing with Recovery Girl and the others, bruises on her arms and body aching. She savored the sting of each of them, though. Each patch of green, black, blue, and red were badges of honor, earned with great pride through sparring with Izawa-sensei. Even if she ended up laying on the floor gasping for air and limbs screaming from how much she was working her body. Nijire needed to learn how to throw more than a decent punch. Someone like All for One wasn't someone she could just sock in the jaw and expect to be done with him. And Izawa-sensei, was the only person she knew was an expert in intensive hand-to-hand. So, for every day since Izuku-sensei had been read and she went with him to one of the gyms and was trained to deal with all-out close-quarters combat. Fighting with Yu sometimes as well since she was also training with them. Yu thankfully had not held back during their direct fighting. She probably would have been upset if Yu did. Even if it meant she had to walk away with Lichtenberg scars on her, they were always gone by the next week. Let Recovery Girl glare at her for it. She didn't care, and All for One would not be so kind as to not shock her with whatever electricity quirks he had. Deku-Sensei's disappointed glances did make her shift uncomfortably, though, because he would remind her that fighting All for One was their last resort, not the main plan, and she shouldn't be pushing herself as if it was. She knew that, but she didn't want to just sit around either. All for One wasn't the only villain out there, and she refused to let herself slip when she could be training herself to be the best she could be. Thankfully, she didn't have to stew for much longer in her thoughts with Jiki walking into the wing with a new San. They were the last two to get here, since the forest Jiki was training was the furthest out from the main building, and now that they were, it was time to take inheritance. Nijire pushed off the wall and walked over to stand with Jiki in front of Deku-Sensei, Yagi-san, and Recovery Girl. Yagi-san's eyes were pitying, most likely blaming himself for their change in behavior, and it took everything in her not to feel insulted. Recovery Girl had pursed lips and clearly upset. Deku-Sensei, thankfully, didn't let a single shred of pity show and only looked at them the same way she imagined that commanders looked at their soldiers. Like they were damned if they did and damned if they didn't. He looked at them like he knew they understood what they were doing and respected their choice, even though he didn't like it. Okay, now that everyone is here, we can get started on transferring the quirk to them, Deku-Sensei said, then motioned towards the two hospital beds they set up. We aren't sure how inheritance may affect you as it settles in aside from some dizziness, so both of you are going to be laying on the cots, Deku-Sensei instructed. Nijire nodded, and the two of them sat on the beds, ready to lay down if she got lightheaded. Since digestion wouldn't hit you both at the same time due to Amajiki-san's quirk, we are going to transfer inheritance via BLD transfusion, Deku-Sensei informed them, showing them 2 IV bags. We'll use saline bags after we inject each with 3 ml of BLD to mitigate any negative reactions to different BLD types. Deku-Sensei further elaborated before turning to Yagi-san with 2 needles in hand. Yagi-san sat down himself with his arms out and ready to give up his BLD, likely trying to concentrate on his longing to pass inheritance on. Nijire flinched when she felt nervous fingers trace over her own hand. She glanced over to Jiki, and he was biting his lip. Nijire didn't hesitate to interlock their fingers and squeeze Jiki's hand back. She was sure that Jiki was anxious about this no matter how much he tried to hide it. When the bags were properly filled and Recovery Girl approved the bags were ready, Deku-Sensei brought the bags over, hanging them up, and he started to prepare Jiki's arm, while Recovery Girl took care of her arm. Both Deku-Sensei and Recovery Girl worked very carefully to stay completely in step with each other, swabbing the area with disinfectant, prepping the vein, and then finally putting the needle in. Nijire bit her lip as the cold fluid entered the vein, a tingling sensation making her aware of every single vein under her skin until it was everywhere. Then when she opened her eyes, her vision was blurring. The room started spinning as the tingling turned to prickling. Nijire opened her mouth to question what was happening, but something else tugged at her, while filling her head with cotton. Not wanting to fall over, she laid down and her heavy eyelids closed. But that didn't stop the topsy-turvy feeling and her heart leap in her chest when she felt the bed under her give away, pulled away from consciousness and wrapped in something else brisk and chilly. Nijire's eyes shot open and saw she was surrounded by water and immediately held her breath. She looked around and nearly jumped when she saw an equally surprised-looking Jiki meeting her eyes and floating in the water with her. She tightened her grip on his hand to reassure him. Wherever they were and whatever was going on, they at least had each other. Looking around again, she saw they were floating in open water, like an ocean she suspected, and looked up and saw they were right next to the surface and pointed up to it. They would need to breathe soon, and she tried to swim up, but a JRK of Jiki's arm stopped her. Confused, she looked back to him, and Jiki pointed to his mouth. Then she saw he was breathing normally. Nijire looked for some gills, but didn't see any. It's not real, Jiki tried to say, but looked confused when no sound came. But she could read his lips and took a breath herself. The water was cold as it slid down her throat, but there wasn't any of the discomfort she expected would come from drowning. This was so weird. She wasn't sure what was going on exactly. Jiki didn't look much better and shrugged when he caught her questioning look. Then suddenly his eyes shot open, and he pulled her to him. Nijire whipped her head around, and her jaw dropped. Some large creature that was absolutely not there before floated beside them. So massively large that both she and Jiki together were smaller than its wide pale blue eyes. The crooning and warped echo of a whale's call echoed in their ears. And for some reason the sound put her at ease. She looked all around to get a better look of just what the creature was. Its yellow skin stretching far to either side she looked, and below was a series of glowing yellow tentacles stretching beyond where she could see. Carefully, Nijire let go of Jiki's hand and swam forward and reached out to slide the large creature's skin. Another bellowing croon came from whatever the creature was, and a thought came to her mind. Go deeper. Yagi-san's voice echoed in her ears. Nijire blinked and turned to Jiki, wondering if he heard it too. Jiki quickly nodded his head. Carefully, they looked down below, then took each other's hand. They couldn't see anything other than the yellow tentacles, and with some reluctance swam down following them. Pressure building on them as they followed the yellow tentacles down, but there wasn't anything pushing them back up like in a real body of water. And after what felt like an hour, they made it to the end of the tentacles and found a coral reef there looking strangely empty without any fish to occupy it. Before they could think about it, though something else massive rose from the reef. The shape, though, was familiar, a large pink seahorse with black eyes. Well, if a seahorse was the size of two whales put together and had glowing tentacles. Hauntingly, a trill came from it. A pair of its tentacles came up and pulled them to its head. The calm and comforting feeling pulsed over their skin as soon as they touched them. Hold on. A new woman's voice softly told them, and they held onto the ridges of the spines coming out of the seahorse's head, the creature moving through the reef and down further into the coral as life seemed to spring up within it. Not ready yet, the voice told them, the pressure of the water feeling odd and just a bit too much. Nijire tried to ask what the woman meant, but no words came from her. Inheritance isn't settled yet, needs more time. The woman whispered as the creature settled down in the middle of the reef. Your bodies must adjust still, the woman told them. The creature laying down, and the two of them were laid down on a large anemone. Nijire wanted to question her more about this, but haziness slid over her skin. All will become clear when you wake. We shall explain through Yagi. Just let yourselves take the time you need. The woman told them as the creature moved to block the light from up above. We won't be going anywhere, the woman promised as Nijire's vision faded to black once again. Nijire gripped Jiki's hand, trying to make sure that he was still with her. His squeeze back was oddly firm, and the chill of the water brushing over her skin was fading until... Hato, are you waking up? Deku-Sensei called. Nijire blearily opened her eyes, wincing when the light blinded her. HMFD, she groaned back, her hand coming up to rub at her face. Then she sat up slowly. Wha? Nijire hoarsely asked, someone passing a cup of juice to her. You're feeling the aftereffects of inheritance transferring to you. Deku-Sensei told her. How does your head feel? Deku-Sensei asked her. Fuzzy, Nijire answered, her vision calming down from how it was swimming when she woke up. Is Jiki okay? Nijire asked. A grunt from Jiki replied before Deku-Sensei could. Yes, his body is recovering faster since it's used to his genes rewriting themselves. Your body isn't. So, you will take some more time. Deku-Sensei explained, pushing her to take another sip of the juice in her hands. Oh, that would make sense. Nijire thought, sipping the tangy juice again. Then the woman's words came back to her. Is that what the seahorse woman meant by us not being ready yet? Nijire asked him. Deku-Sensei blinked. Seahorse woman. Deku-Sensei repeated, his face scrunched up in confusion. I'm afraid I know what Hato-chan is talking about, Dr. Midoriya. Yagi-sensei coming over to them. Deku-Sensei, raised a brow back to the blonde man. Nana explained that she was able to enter their space and that they weren't fully established in the mind space yet. Yagi-san explained softly. And Nana? Jiki questioned. Shimura Nana was the holder before myself. She was the one you both met after falling unconscious. Yagi-san answered, his hand softly placed on Jiki's shoulder. Speaking of, why did they fall unconscious? That wasn't something you said might happen. Izawa-sensei pointedly asked with his arms crossed. I can also explain that part, Izawa-san. Yagi-san admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. According to the others, there was a lull once it was transferred to the next person. It wasn't very strong back when Yuchi passed it over to the second, but as more and more quirks were added, the stronger the lull was. Yagi-san told them, I was quite dazed when Nana passed it on to myself, and slept like the dead that night. I passed it off at the time, but with the combined passage to two people adding to the pressure of the lull, and with the direct infusion to their BLD, Yagi-san elaborated for them, caused them to fall unconscious because it hit them more rapidly, along with inheritance adjusting to having two more quirks added to its horde. Deku-Sensei finished for the man. Indeed, Yagi-san said, nodding his head. All right, then how long will this lull affect them? Izawa-sensei questioned. Not for long, they'll be back to normal soon. At most they will have some shakiness tomorrow morning when they wake up, but that shall be it, though it will take much longer before they'll be able to fully enter the mind space like I have. Yagi-san answered. The past holders will carefully watch over them and their progress. Yagi-san assured Izawa-sensei. But there won't be any more fainting spells, right? Oswald asked, his eyes shooting to look at them both with concern. No, young Oswald. No more fainting unless they push themselves too far with using inheritance. Yagi-san told them. Good. Izawa-sensei said back, glaring at Yagi-san. The kids have had enough excitement. All of you out. Recovery Girl exclaimed, chasing everyone out, and then began to take their vitals, offering them both the little gummies that she usually gave them before using her quirk on them. Nijire sighed, relief covering her like a blanket, having not realized that she had been overstimulated by all of the people being there, but she much preferred the quiet that overtook the medical wing. Nijire laid back down and sighed, closing her eyes and choosing to rest a little more while Recovery Girl focused on Jiki for now. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Villain Deku Became a Teacher at U.A. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Bloomerbill for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on fanfiction.net for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.